Nobody in that grocery store line expected the guy with the sleeve tattoos and the torn jacket to be the one who stopped. The fluorescent lights in the Sobeys on Dunbar Street flickered the way they always did near the back of the store, and the checkout lines were 7-8 people deep by 5:30 on a Thursday. It was the kind of evening where everyone just wanted to get home. Rain had been coming down since noon, the kind of cold Vancouver rain that soaks through a jacket in under a minute. And the people waiting in line had that particular look of polite exhaustion that Canadians wear when they're frustrated, but won't say so out loud. Nora Keppler stood at the self-checkout machine in Bay 4, and she was losing. She was 41 years old, and her hands had been shaking for 3 years now. Not dramatically, not the way people imagined when they heard the word tremors. It was more like her fingers had developed their own opinion about things. Fine most of the time. Manageable, but under fluorescent lights, after a full shift on her feet at the dry cleaners on 16th, after picking up her 7-year-old son from aftercare, after carrying 2 reusable bags stuffed with groceries through the parking lot in the rain. Her hands did what they wanted. The touchscreen at Bay 4 was not designed for hands that did what they wanted. She had been standing there for 4 minutes. She knew because she'd checked her phone between attempts, that nervous habit of measuring time when time starts to feel like it's being watched. The machine had asked her 3 times to place her item in the bagging area. And 3 times she had placed it there, and 3 times the machine had disagreed. A small notification kept appearing in red at the top of the screen. Unexpected item. Please wait for assistance. No assistance came. Her son, Jonah, stood beside the cart holding a box of the frozen waffles he'd asked for twice that week. He was being very good. That was the thing about Jonah. He was almost always very good in public, the way kids are when they understand, without being told directly, that their parent is already carrying something heavy. He just held the waffles and watched the screen with her, as if watching it together made any difference. Behind Nora, the line had grown. She could feel it the way you feel a room shift when people start sighing. Not loudly, just that soft exhale of collective impatience that is somehow louder than noise. A woman 2 people back said something to the man beside her. Nora didn't catch the words, but she caught the tone. That lowered voice kind of comment people make when they think they're being discreet and they're not. Nora tried the screen again. Her index finger pressed the confirm button and slid sideways at the last second. Error. Please rescan your item. She took a breath. She rescanned the pasta sauce. She placed it in the bagging area very carefully, steadying her right wrist with her left hand the way her physiotherapist had shown her. The machine beeped. Unexpected item. Jonah looked up at her. She gave him what she hoped was a reassuring smile. He didn't look entirely convinced. She was thinking about stepping away. Just leaving the cart, taking Jonah's hand, walking out into the rain and figuring out dinner from whatever was left in the fridge. She'd done it before, once, at a different store, on a worse day. It wasn't the groceries that made her stay. It was the thought of doing it in front of Jonah. She didn't want him to remember her that way. Giving up at a grocery store checkout because a machine was unkind. That was when the man behind her spoke. Not to the person next to him, not under his breath, directly quietly to Nora. Hey, the weight sensor on these things is busted about half the time. There's a trick. She turned. He was maybe 35, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket with a tear along the left seam that had been carefully restitched. Sleeve tattoos on both arms, the kind that told a story if you looked long enough. He had a basket with maybe 6 items in it. Milk bread, a rotisserie, chicken, 2 cans of soup, a bag of apple slices. The kind of basket that said he'd been doing his own grocery run for a while and had it down to exactly what was needed. His name was Curtis Bray, though Nora didn't know that yet. He nodded toward the screen. If you press the button and hold it for 2 seconds instead of tapping, it registers different. I don't know why. But it works about 70% of the time. Nora blinked. Really? Worth trying. She turned back to the machine. She pressed confirm and held it. 2 seconds. The machine accepted it. The green bar filled. Now, she let out a breath that she hadn't known she was holding. Thank you, she said, and it came out smaller than she intended, the way gratitude sometimes does when you're tired and it catches you off guard. Curtis nodded. These machines are badly designed. It's not you. It was such a specific thing to say. Not no problem or happens to everyone. He'd said, it's not you, as if he'd understood in 30 seconds what she'd been quietly arguing with herself about for the past 4 minutes. She turned back to scan the next item. Her hands were still shaking, but somehow it felt less catastrophic now, being observed by someone who had just made clear they were on her side. She got through 3 more items before the machine froze entirely. Screen went gray. A small icon spun in the corner, going nowhere. Girl. The sigh from the line behind her was audible this time. Nora pressed the help button and waited. Across the store, she could see the attendant, a teenager in a red vest, helping someone in Bay 2. He hadn't looked over. Curtis had set his basket down on the floor and was checking something on his phone. But when he glanced up and saw the frozen screen, he picked the basket back up and stepped forward, not pushing, just moving into her peripheral vision. "Do you want me to flag him down?" he said, meaning the attendant. "Getting. I already pressed help." "Yeah, the help button doesn't actually alert anyone. There's no sound on the other end. You have to wave." Nora almost laughed. "Of course there's not." Curtis raised one arm and waved, a slow deliberate wave, until the teenager in the red vest looked over and held up one finger. 1 minute. Curtis nodded back and lowered his arm. "He'll come," Curtis said. "You seem to know a lot about the self-checkout situation." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but close to one. "I worked in a Loblaws for 4 years in my 20s. Night shifts. I've seen every way these machines can fail." Jonah, who had been quiet through all of this, suddenly held up the box of frozen waffles toward Curtis. It was a very earnest gesture, the kind of offering a 7-year-old makes when they want to contribute to a conversation. "These are the ones with the little pockets," Jonah said. "For the syrup, they're the best kind." Curtis looked at the box with appropriate seriousness. "I've heard good things about those. They're better than regular ones." "Yeah, I believe you." Jonah seemed satisfied with this. He lowered the box and went back to watching the frozen screen. The attendant arrived, scanned his keycard, tapped something on the back panel, and the machine came back to life. He gave Nora a quick apologetic smile and moved on without a word. She continued scanning. She was almost done when Jonah tugged her sleeve. "Mom, the man helped us." "I know. Buddy. Did you say, thank you?" "Yeah, I did." Jonah considered this. Then he looked up at Curtis and said, with the direct simplicity that 7-year-olds deploy without warning, "Thank you for helping my mom. She has shaky hands sometimes, but she's really good at other stuff." The checkout lane went very quiet. Nora felt the familiar heat in her face, the complicated mix of mortification and love that only your own child can produce in you. She started to say something, an apology, a redirect, something, but Curtis spoke first. "Yeah," he said to Jonah genuinely. "Like what?" Jonah thought about it for exactly 1 second. "She draws really good, and she makes the best grilled cheese, and she fixed my bike last week with just a thing from the junk drawer." "That's a good list," Curtis said. "I know," Jonah agreed. Nora finished scanning, paid, and started bagging. Curtis moved forward to the machine with his own basket. She was trying to remember how to arrange her face into something normal while also fitting pasta sauce, a block of cheddar, and frozen waffles into a bag that was already slightly too full. "My daughter does that," Curtis said. He wasn't looking at her. He was scanning his milk. "Introduces me to strangers. Tells them things I'd never think to mention." "How old is she?" 9. He paused. "She's with her aunt tonight. I get Thursdays and every other weekend." He said it plainly, without the particular weight people sometimes put on that kind of sentence. But Nora heard what was underneath it anyway, the math of a family rearranged, of counting days. "It's hard," she said, not a question. "Some nights more than others." He scanned the bread. "Tonight's okay. Tonight I'm buying a rotisserie chicken and watching something I've been putting off for a month, so." She smiled at that. "Sounds like a solid Thursday." "What about you?" "Solid Thursday." She looked at Jonah, who was now trying to balance the waffle box on his head. "Getting there," she said. Curtis finished scanning and paid. They ended up walking toward the exit at the same time, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal that the rain had turned into the lighter kind, almost mist, the city lights smearing orange and white across the wet pavement. In the entryway, where people tend to pause and recalibrate their grip on their bags before heading out into the weather, Curtis shifted his bag to his other hand and said, "For what it's worth, the shaky hands thing. My mom had essential tremor. Started in her early 40s. She lived a completely normal life. Just wanted to say." Nora looked at him. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering information, the way you share a map with someone headed somewhere you've already been. It was a very different thing. "Thanks," she said. "I'm figuring it out." Yeah, you're clearly good at figuring things out. He glanced at Jonah. You've got a very convincing PR team. Jonah, hearing this, looked up. What's a PR team? Someone who tells people all the good things about you. Jonah pointed at himself. I'm that. You're very good at it, Curtis confirmed. Yay. They stepped out into the mist together, then went in different directions. Curtis toward the north end of the lot. Nora toward her car, which was parked slightly too far away because she'd arrived when the closer spots were all taken, and had made a choice she'd regretted every step back. She got Jonah buckled. She loaded the bags into the trunk. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, the way you do sometimes when you need a second to let the day settle. Jonah's voice came from the back seat. I liked that man. Me, too. Was nice. Was. You pause. Mom? Yeah. You are good at other stuff. I wasn't making it up. She reached back between the seats and found his hand in the dark and held it for a moment. I know, bud. Thank you. She started the car. 3 weeks later, Nora was at the same Sobeys, Thursday evening again, because that was when she did groceries, same time every week, a small consistency that made the week feel manageable. She had her list on her phone, her bags folded under her arm, and she had decided in advance that she would use the regular checkout lane this time. The self-checkout machines at Bay 3 and 4 were still there, still flickering. She walked past them without stopping. She chose lane 6, behind an older man with a cart full of what appeared to be entirely soup cans and crackers, which she found quietly impressive. The cashier was a young woman who moved quickly and didn't make conversation, which Nora appreciated. Jonah was with her mother tonight, so it was just her and the list. She was loading her bags into the cart when she heard Jonah's voice in her memory. She's really good at other stuff, and she thought about the particular way he'd said it. Not defensively, not to fix anything. Just because it was true and he thought the man should know. She thought about Curtis too. The information he'd offered at the door, calm as handing someone an umbrella. My mom had essential tremor. She lived a completely normal life. 6 words that had turned a medical fact she'd been quietly afraid of into something livable, into something with a before and an after. A woman who had the same hands Nora had, and who had gotten through it. That evening, after she put the groceries away, Nora sat at the kitchen table and opened the sketchbook that had been sitting on the shelf since January. She'd used to draw regularly before everything got complicated. Before the tremor diagnosis, before the separation, before the months of learning to recalibrate everything. The sketchbook had felt like a thing from a different version of herself. She picked up the pencil. Her hand shook slightly. She held her wrist and drew anyway. She drew a grocery store, fluorescent lights, 2 people in a checkout line and a small boy holding a box of waffles. She wasn't trying to make it good. She was just trying to make it true. It took her 40 minutes, and her hand ached a bit at the end, and it was the best she'd felt in weeks. She tore it carefully from the sketchbook. Went to the small corkboard beside the kitchen door, where she pinned things she wanted to remember, and put it up there between a photo of Jonah at the beach last summer, and a parking ticket she'd meant to dispute and forgotten about. She looked at it for a moment. There was something she'd wanted to write at the bottom. Something she'd been turning over since the parking lot 3 weeks ago, and she finally wrote it now on a small piece of paper and pinned it. Underneath the drawing. You don't have to be okay to be kind. Sometimes kindness is just someone saying, I've been there, here's what I know. She made tea. She graded the vocabulary worksheets she'd been avoiding since Sunday. She volunteered twice a week helping adults with literacy at the community center on Oak Street, something she'd started doing because she needed somewhere to put her energy when everything else felt out of her hands. She put Jonah's grilled cheese stuff out on the counter for tomorrow, so she wouldn't have to think about it in the morning. It was by most measures an ordinary night. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment on the north end of Dunbar, a man named Curtis Bray was doing what he'd said he'd do on a Thursday. Watching something he'd been putting off, with a rotisserie chicken going cold on the coffee table beside him, and his phone face down because he was trying to be better about that. His daughter would call him on Saturday morning, the way she always did, and he'd tell her about the kid with the waffles because she liked stories like that, the ones where someone was decent for no particular reason. He'd been thinking about that evening more than he expected. Not in any dramatic way. Just the way small moments sometimes linger. The boy saying she's really good at other stuff with that total uncomplicated certainty. The way the woman had looked, just for a second, Like someone had handed her something she hadn't known she was waiting for. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his. They had exchanged maybe 200 words in a grocery store checkout lane, and then gone their separate directions into the Vancouver rain. But something had shifted in that lane. Something quiet and unannounced. A woman who had almost given up had stayed. A man who was used to being looked at sideways had been useful to someone. A 7-year-old had told the truth about his mother to a stranger, and the stranger had listened like it mattered. And it did matter. That's the thing about these moments that's easy to miss when you're inside them. They matter while they're happening, not just in retrospect. Nora knew it when she let out that breath and the machine accepted the confirmation. Curtis knew it when the kid held up the waffle box like an offering. Even the teenager in the red vest, who had unlocked the frozen machine and moved on without ceremony, had been part of something without knowing it. The grocery store went on. The fluorescent lights kept flickering. The lineup in lane 4 moved forward. Other people came in from the rain and shook out their jackets and started over. And somewhere across the city that same night, a woman sat at a kitchen table, with a pencil in her shaking hand and drew a picture of the night she almost left but didn't. And pinned it to the wall, where she could see it every morning on her way out the door. I keep thinking about the moment Nora almost walked away. Not because she was weak, she wasn't. She'd been holding things together for 3 years with the kind of quiet determination most people never have to find in themselves. A diagnosis, a separation, a child to raise mostly alone, a job that kept her on her feet all day. She was already doing so much more than anyone standing in that checkout line could see, but, in that moment, with the machine beeping at her, and the sighs building behind her, and her hands refusing to cooperate, she was about to let the weight of it tip her over. What stopped her wasn't a grand gesture. It was one sentence from a stranger, "It's not you." I think about that a lot. How much it matters to be told the truth by someone who has no reason to lie. Curtis didn't know Nora. He didn't owe her anything. He was tired too. Thursday evening, end of the week, a basket with exactly what he needed and nothing more, counting days until he'd see his daughter again. He had his own weight, and yet he looked at what was happening, and he chose to say something real instead of nothing. That's what I'd call genuine decency. Not the performative kind, not the kind that needs an audience. The kind that costs you nothing but a moment's attention and still manages to change the temperature of a room. And then there's Jonah, 7 years old, holding a box of waffles, announcing to a stranger that his mom fixes bikes with things from the junk drawer. He wasn't trying to be profound. He was just telling the truth about someone he loved, the way kids do before they learn to be guarded about it. But that truth landed somewhere. It landed in Curtis. It landed in the checkout lane. It reminded everyone within earshot that the woman struggling with the machine was a whole person, resourceful, capable, loved. Not just an inconvenience in front of them. There's something in that I keep coming back to. Nora had the intelligence to stay, to try one more time, to accept help without letting it diminish her. That's harder than it sounds. When you're used to managing everything yourself, when you've had to become self-sufficient out of necessity, someone offering to help can feel like being seen at your worst. She let it feel like being seen, full stop. That took clarity. That took a kind of inner steadiness that doesn't come automatically. It gets built, slowly, through all those moments you chose to keep going when it would have been easier not to. Again, she kept going. She went home. She made dinner. She opened the sketchbook she hadn't touched in months and she drew, hands shaking and all. Not because someone told her to. Because something in the evening had quietly reminded her of who she was before everything got complicated. That's the thing about small acts of honesty and care. They don't fix anything directly. They just shift something. They remind you that the version of yourself you're afraid you've lost is still in there, still capable, still worth believing in. I don't think it's complicated, really. When people choose to pay attention to each other, really pay attention, without judgment, without impatience, something comes back to them too. Curtis went home lighter that night than he had in a while. Not because anything in his life had changed, but because he'd been useful to someone in a way that mattered. That's what I take from Nora's story. Not that kindness is magic, but that decency, and clear-headedness, and the willingness to keep trying even when your hands won't cooperate. Those things move through people. They don't stay contained. They show up later in a sketchbook, in a pinned drawing on a corkboard, in a little boy who grows up knowing that his mother kept going and that strangers, sometimes, are good.